Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 93, and we are beginning mostly beginning our Arcanum Unbounded deviation, assuming you ignore our quick white sand from last week. But we're doing Emperor's Soul, the first half of Emperor's Soul this week, and here to talk about it with me are Paul and Eliot. How are you? How are you, Paul?
Amazing. I'm excited to get started on another thing. Also trying to figure out why we're not just reading Rhythm of War right away. But really excited to learn about a new system and see another part of our universe.
Cool. Eliot?
I'm good. It's a little strange to be stepping outside of Stormlight for a little bit. It's a change of pace. We were so desperately trying to figure out what's going on Roshar. Now we're kind of stepping out into a little more simple of a story, I guess I would say, for sure, in this one. But I'm enjoying it.
Wonderful. We'll keep it simple this episode. One word to summarize the first half of Emperor's Soul that we'll talk about this week. Eliot?
Painting.
Okay. And Paul?
It's a good one. I had artistic, so an artistic painting.
Good.
There we go.
We have a good theme here.
What about you, Trevor? Do you got one?
I don't have one on the top of my head if I can think about it.
You can think about it while I give our mug of the week if we want.
I'll let the intro roll and then I'll think about it.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm going to keep that audio in and just do it without audio and keep your audio in there.
It was, yeah. There's like the violins that swoop in, everything.
Who's on our mug?
Our cup this week has Pac-Man. We've got Pac-Man, whose full name I think on there I couldn't quite fit on our mug, but Pac-Man in Idaho. He's just on a vacation, I guess, visiting Idaho. Pac-Man is an ardent.
Yes.
And we really appreciate the support. We like Pac-Man a lot. Classic game character and podcast supporter. So really appreciate it. So thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be sending out our Dark Eyes bundles this week, the week this goes live, to all of our Ardents, and our Light Eyes bundle to my mother. Thanks, Mom. So
Shout out to Amy.
If you're an Ardent, expect that in the mail, and if you didn't get it, please let me know.
How do you feel that your mom is a shard bearer and you're nothing? Like you're just nothing.
I mean,
you're just a host of some podcast.
It's true. I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. I'll think about it.
Big shard boots to fill,
It's true. I'm going to steal the normal format and say I'm going to have two words. And my two words are going to be Imperial Fool.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't do what me and Elliot would do and just kind of smush them like Imperial Fool.
Imperial Fool.
Yeah.
He makes the rules around here, so he can kind of do what he wants.
I guess so.
That's true. Elliot, you want to talk about your word?
Yeah, I do. So painting touched on, Paul, your word, really kind of the artistic nature of this story, which definitely had some interesting themes about the artistic process and sort of how an artist approaches their work, which we can talk about. And then I had to just pick painting because there's a very specific painting referenced a few times in this, and I can't help but wonder if it might be similar to another painting I can think of.
Paul?
Wow. Who knows? Not me. So, my word is artistic. We see that with the painting. So our protagonist here, Shy, or whose perspective we're seeing.
Right.
Shy, she forged, like kind of forged or painted like a replica of some valuable painting and was stealing it, all this stuff. But she has a lot of artistic abilities that are very good, apparently, to have mimicked this painting. So she's very talented. Not just this painting, but it seems like a lot of the elements of this world are really artistic because she's in a cell that has like 46 or 44 different types of like stone in it. And I just kind of got this really cool imagery of like a marble effect that's really cool in her cell. And I was like, that seems pretty cool. So I kind of have an artistic minded view of our world here.
Sounds good. Here's a sneak peek for next week. There is a deleted prologue to this short story that has a dialogue directly between Shy and the Imperial Fool before she's captured. I will be reading it for you next week once we finish talking about the whole story. So you can look forward to that next week as we get into the actual prologue, the published prologue. And next week I'll explain why it's not in there and why they changed it on what all that means. So you can look forward to that for next week.
That would be really cool if I knew who that was.
You might know who it is.
Yeah.
I might have a guess based purely off the name.
Yeah, fair. That's a good point.
I did have a question for you, Trevor, though, before we jump into the chapters here.
Sure.
So we're in the Cellish system, is that correct?
Yes.
And are we on the planet Cell itself? I don't think the story told.
Yes, we are on Cell. Cell has, I believe, 3 major empires across the planet. The planet's like really big, if I recall correctly. And there's 3 separate empires, and they all kind of just ignore each other because there's plenty of room for everybody. So they just view themselves as the center of the civilized world and kind of just ignore. There's some trading back and forth, but as far as politics go, they pretty much leave each other alone. So we are on Cell, and we're in, oh shoot, I don't remember the kingdom that we're in, or the empire that we're in.
They refer to it as the Rose Empire a few times, but I'm sure it has another name probably too, right?
It does, yeah.
So my actual question for you is, in the system overview, it talks about the planet Cell being Cosmere standard in size.
Okay.
I was wondering, we don't really have a perspective of what that means. Is that intended to be like Earth, like our standard size?
Yes. So what you're referring to is Chris referring to Cell as Cosmere standard 1.5 in size and 1.0 in gravity, I believe is what it has. And yes, that's just for you as the reader. Earth is 1 and 1. 1.0 for size, 1.0 for gravity. And it just gives you a mental image of what you're looking at. So we're looking at an Earth and a half in size and Earth gravity.
Got it.
Whereas Rashar, I believe, is 0.9 in size and 0.7 in gravity. Good question. Okay. It also explains in the Cellish system excerpt that the physical location that you are in shapes the magic that you are trying to harness. So before we really get into the prologue and the couple days, the early days of Shy here, I want to talk about the soul stamp that she is about to craft and how that works. So the best way I've heard it explained to me is, think of it as programming. The investiture is trapped on the cognitive realm, and it can be harnessed via very specific patterns in stamps. So I'm going to carve this stamp in a very specific way and imprint it onto a cognitive soul, and it will then imprint that onto the soul. Does that make sense?
If I hadn't read, that would make no sense. But knowing how we see it used, it makes sense to me. So
Okay, we'll revisit this here in a second. But our prologue, the published prologue in the published novel, is all the arbiters of this is right after the emperor's accident. His wife has been, or assassination attempt. His wife has just been murdered. He's been sentenced brain dead, basically. He's a vegetable, as they call them. He's on his deathbed. His heart is still beating. His mind is still telling his heart to beat, but that's pretty much it. He stares straight at the ceiling, and that's all he does. So the arbiters are all talking about, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? And they come to the conclusion that, well, we could get a forger to reattach his soul, basically, to his body. And they view that as sacrilegious, basically, or a taboo, and they refer to their own forgers as rememberers, and you don't forge a human soul, you only forge objects. So for Shai to be experienced in forging and stamping her own soul as opposed to other people, and as well as other people's souls, that's something you don't touch. And so that they're begrudgingly shoving this under the carpet of, we're going to forge the Emperor's soul, have Shai forge the Emperor's soul, but we're not going to tell anyone about it, certainly, and we're not going to do it ourselves because that's a no-no. What were you guys' takeaways from this opening setup to this short story?
it feels like the people, I couldn't fully tell if this was like a necessary evil for our characters that we see to do good, or if this was still a necessary evil, but with the intent to like manipulate or use or gain power from the Emperor. I don't really know, because it seems like it could be either. Just given kind of the eeriness, and she's in this like cell, it seems like they would want to like. I almost think of a comparison to Warbreaker. I feel like our like servants here may like try to flip a switch or something like that, but the concept of it makes sense. They want their country to continue operating and still be in their spots at least, and so they need to enact some not so savory methods of reviving the king, in a sense.
So I had some questions about kind of how, what the intent here is with forging the Emperor's soul. And we learn a bit about forging. Trevor, you kind of explained it a second ago. I'm still a little bit confused as to the end result when you forge something, because you pre-program your magic and then you apply it to either your item or your person, and it changes them. But it's not illumination.
Right.
Like I'm comparing back to Stormlight, because that's what where we just kind of came from.
Sure.
It's not just an image. It actually physically changes the object, right?
Right.
Because like she forges the some of the items in her room, like the table and the window.
Yep.
And they become the thing. And it even talks about how she has to like convince the thing to become the new thing, but then it also like always it believes that it always was the thing. So it's like she's changing history. But then at the same time, it's still a forgery. It still has that stamp that it's getting the magic from. So it's not truly the new thing. Am I summarized? Am I on the right track?
You are.
Yeah, that's how
Okay.
I would describe it myself as well.
So I think that computes in my brain. It's still a little bit confusing that the new thing is and always was the new thing, but still isn't quite the new thing. I think I'm tracking.
I thought of it as kind of a wishy-washy version of soul casting. In that soul casting, you do change something into something else. But with this, it's like you change it into something else as long as it knows it's something else and not the way it was or like something else. Like it maybe could be more easily reversed, but maybe easier to change to begin with like putting a physical stamp on a physical object. Um so
There's two parts to this that I'll touch on. The first is how similar it is to soul casting. So Shalon, when she's trying to make a fire, she's talking to the stick and says, "Hey, you could be fire." And the stick's like, "No, I'm a stick. Why would I be fire? I've always been a stick. I always will be a stick. I'm a stick." And then when she's talking to the boat in a couple chapters previous, she's saying, "Hey, you could become water." And the ship says, "No, I'm a ship. I've always been a ship." And then she says, "Yeah, but your crew needs you to become water. You could save their lives if you become water." And she convinces it to become water. She gives it a motivation and Stormlight, and then it becomes water. Shai's table here, it wants to be taken care of. She's giving it what it wants and reforging it to be have always been taken care of because that's what it has always desired. Does that make sense? So in theory, if she goes and finds a ship that's been shipwrecked, it'll want to be a ship again, and she could repair a ship.
And I think Shai even talks about for a little bit in one of these early chapters about how it's easier or it works better if you improve the thing.
Right.
If you make it, if you convince it, oh, you're a broken window, but you could be a stained glass window, and how that like helps the process along. And I couldn't help think, but back to our poor helpless Shalon trying to convince the stick to become fire, and the stick's like, "No, I want to be a stick," and Shalon's like, "But fire." Like if she had like tried to explain to the stick how fire is so much better than being a stick, maybe it would have worked. Now I'm kind of, assuming that there's parallels in these magic systems, but maybe that's the piece Shalon was missing, was proving to the stick that it really wanted to be fire. Because fire's better.
I was gonna say I think Shalon would learn a lot and gain a lot from being in our story here. Like if she just got to be a fly on the wall and learn from Shai, like maybe she would learn a whole lot about soul casting.
I would like to read some input from Ranks. We've referred to him multiple times on the podcast. I asked,
Check out his YouTube channel.
shout out to his YouTube channel. I asked our spoiler channels that what any input they had on Emperor's Soul and the ones you can't see. And here's what Ranks had to say. There's a curiosity that I have. So forgery works on both objects and people. Soul casting appears to as well, but from what we've seen, it's mostly stuff like Yasna turning a person into fire or smoke and killing them. However, in Words of Radiance, Shalon does something with her drawings where she draws someone as their more noble self. And then when the person sees the picture, it transforms them in that way. I'm wondering if this is tapping into something similar to forgery, and if maybe she's doing this to herself as well when she splits into new personalities. It also makes me wonder if soul casting can be done much more subtly, like turn an urn into a nicer urn instead of blood or smoke or water. No one has thought of that yet, or it takes a lot of mastery of the surge.
Did you say that was some of Rank's thoughts, or was he quoting something else?
That's Rank's thoughts.
Okay. Ranks, I agree with you. I had some similar thoughts as I was reading this. I thought too that scene in Words of Radiance where Shalon draws one of the mercenary guys. I think his name was Bluth, I want to say.
Yep.
And when she draws him, it inspires him to go do something honorable, whereas before he hadn't been. And I thought I had the same similar thought. You explained it way better though, of the possible parallels there of inspiring and improving a thing or a person, which I think we're learning that things and people may be similar than we thought when we first started this series. So I'm on board for sure.
So we've visited Shadesmar, and Gaotona, our Shy's captive arbiter dude, has not. And Shy is trying to explain to him that the table has a soul, and the window has a soul, and Gaotona doesn't believe that. And if somebody in the real world would try to explain that to me, I would not either. But Shy is saying the window wants to be better. The table wants to be better, and if you help it to get there, then it can be. And that kind of goes over Gautona's head. And she's like, okay, whatever, just help me with the Emperor, please. So as she's practicing and kind of doing this creative outlet as she's working on the Emperor's soul, that's what she's doing. She's going to Shadesmar and talking to the stick to become fire.
Now back to Shy and our forgery story though. That there's a limit to this though, right? So she's trying to forge the Emperor's soul, but she can't just forge the ideal version of the Emperor, stamp it on him, and okay, now he's awesome. She has to be as similar as possible to who he actually is, right? Or it won't take.
Right.
So it's like it's a fine balance, right? She has to do all of this research. This is why it takes so long, right? This is why she doesn't know if she's going to be able to get it done in the time she has, is because she has to know like intimately all the details of the Emperor's personality and his motives, like better than even he does. So she has to design this perfectly to be him, but also maybe kind of like nudge him to be a little better. That's the assignment.
She gets a hold of Ashravan's personal journal and reads through it to try to get into his brain and figure out how this soul stamp can actually take. So,
And from I've been trying to figure out is she actually going to do this? Because they talk about how it like, oh, this is something you have to spend like 3 years doing or something like that, like some crazy amount of time, and she's given 100 days. So like, one, can she do it? Two, is she actually gonna do it? Because I think she just wants to leave. That's like the whole beginning, is her like looking at the rocks of her cell, because if she can convince them to be something else or whatever, like knows more about their history, all this stuff, if she can rewrite that, then she could kind of disassemble the cell and break free and all this stuff. So sorry I yawned, but like, is she going to like do this, or is she just gonna like pretend like she's doing it, and then until she finds a way to skedaddle.
That was actually, I think, the most interesting dilemma for me through this story is Shy's motivation herself. She could escape. She has at least a plan to. And part of her wants to, but part of her doesn't. Part of her wants to take on this creative challenge and see it through to the end, especially once she starts to get, invested in it. Once she starts to, get a little ways into it and realize, oh, but I could finish. Ooh, but this would be such a huge achievement. I thought that was really cool. That inner struggle there of, does she escape? Does she get out? She thinks she's going to get killed if she stays. They don't have a lot of motivation to keep her around. So once she achieves her goal, so it's this fine balance of, how far do I go? When do I escape? When do I get out? Do I? Interesting little glimpse into the mind of our character.
Yeah. The painting is a good symbol for her end goal of the Emperor's Soul is Gautona figures out that, oh, you didn't make one copy of the painting, you made two. And you made the second one deliberately wrong so that we'd find out, but the original isn't there anymore. What is hanging up, what we thought you failed to steal, you successfully did, and you made a perfect copy that we could never figure out. So the amount of talent that would require to make a fake that would take days to figure out, but also make another fake, but it's basically the original, is at what point does that actually become art itself? When you're imitating this masterpiece that's hanging in the gallery to perfection, to where nobody can replicate it and understand that it's not actually the real painting. Shy insists that she is an artist herself because she has achieved the same thing that this other artist has.
That was part of my question with her motivation, right? So she imitates this, and doesn't Gautona or someone bring up, like, why don't you just be a painter? Because you're like really good at this, and like, isn't it? It's like respected, right? Or like art is highly viewed, or
Right.
whatever here, all this stuff. Why don't you just do that? Like, you could stop being a scoundrel and thief. And she gives me a lot of Lift energy, but like maybe more mature version of Lift.
Couple years older, Lift.
Yeah, Lift who's less joking, I guess, less snarky. But yeah, like, why don't you just do art? Why do you have to be all mischievous? And I don't fully know, but we know she just likes causing problems, at least, or has some other motivation which we don't know yet.
I'll play devil's advocate a little bit there and say, first off, I'll agree with Cheyenne that I think she is an artist, that she clearly has a lot of skill, and what she does is very impressive. That said, that there's a big difference between copying what someone has done and creating something out of nothing. And that creative impulse, that imagination, that generation of something new requires a slightly different, maybe not skill set, but mindset perhaps than copying something. I'm thinking of, like, maybe a music artist that I really enjoy writes a song and sings it, and it's great, it's awesome. But then somebody on YouTube goes and does a cover of it, and maybe it's actually better than the original. I can love the cover just as much, if not more, than the original song, but the credit still goes, in my opinion, to the original for that creation of the work to begin with. So is a forger an artist? Yes, but it's not the same, in my opinion. while we're talking about the painting, you ready for a theory?
I am.
We got to get into a theory, right?
Yeah.
So I have absolutely nothing to go on for this theory, but I
like it.
really want it to be true.
I support this theory already. I haven't heard it yet.
All right, I've
but
won
I
Paul
agree.
over. I'm going to win the rest of you over. Just bear with me. In at least my reading so far, Paul, you've read some Mistborn, so you'll have to clue me in if maybe we can pull Mistborn into this at some point. So far, I've been on 2 major planets. I've been on Roshar, and we read Warbreaker, which was on Nalthis.
Nalthis.
Yep.
In both of those worlds, the only 2 we've been to so far, there was a painting. And that painting had some pretty striking similarities in those 2 worlds. Potentially, could easily be, I have a running theory, was the same. Now we just journeyed over to a 3rd planet, and lo and behold, there's a painting, and it's pivotal, important to our story. But there's no description that I could find of what actually this painting looks like. Like none. They talk about that there's a painting, and that it's masterfully done, and that it's awesome. But there's no description, unless I missed it, of what it looks like.
I remember hearing they listed some of the differences between the paintings. Am I right? And it wasn't that descriptive, but they're like, oh, the moon was a little lower on this one, and like 2, maybe 3 other things. And so in my head, it wasn't the same, but I don't remember well enough. But yeah, they don't just like describe the entirety of the painting.
Yeah, I'll have to go read that again because maybe it'll dash my theory. But what I would love to be true is that this is the same painting that we saw described in Warbreaker, and also that we just saw in Shadesmar in Oathbringer.
And
that's the theory.
Even if it's not the same painting, maybe by the same artist, that would still have major implications for.
Yeah.
I was gonna relate it to Hoyd, in that we see it in all of our storylines, right? We see a painting, but what if Hoyd is the artist? You know,
I mean,
could be.
What do you think he does in his spare time? You know, before he goes to bed at night.
He plays the flute.
Oh, that's true. I miss my flute.
And paints while he plays the flute.
Yeah, he was missing a flute for a while, so like he probably paints. He's had plenty of time to like work on his painting skills, so I'm sure he's gotten pretty good. I like the theory though.
One more detail I want to touch on is the blood sealer and the mechanics of how the blood sealer works. So similar to the stamp, it has to do with a 24-hour period that it on a person, it's not going to stick indefinitely, whereas on a vase or a table or a whatever, it will stick indefinitely. But if you're imprinting on a person, it has to be replenished every day. I think there's a window there where you can re-stamp it. You don't have to do it. Anyway, but the blood sealer takes some of Shai's blood to keep her in the room and stamps the door with her blood, and it will alert him if she leaves a proximity of the stamp. Did you guys catch that? Understand the mechanics of that?
Yes, and it seems like the implication was even more than just alerts, that there's like a tracking mechanism almost based on it, where if she leaves the room, not only does it alert the blood sealer kind of knows where she is or like what direction she's in.
Yep.
Some nifty magic.
He also apparently has a skeleton crew with him. I don't really understand that, to be honest.
Isn't it kind of like pets or like minion type little animal guys that like if she leaves, they're gonna come after her, and she's like very afraid. Like even her being super cunning and sneaky is like, no, I would be toast if he Six's I've imagined them just as like hounds. Like if he sends his hounds on her, you know.
It reminded me of Vasher's skeleton army at the end of Warbreaker. That like
Oh yeah.
one of the twists at the end of that book. I don't know if you guys remember, but all the statues around the city were secretly old warriors that they made statues of, and then he could awaken them as a stone army. Do you guys remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right.
no big deal.
Yeah. It's
And,
like
and didn't we learn at the end of that story that the statues even had like they had the bones of those old warriors in them, so they could be more easily awakened?
right.
Which reminds me, very very briefly, then we'll move on. We have a lot of statues in Stormlight for heralds. So we think Zyle's gonna come and
Ooh.
have a part two. You know, why not? Why couldn't he do it there?
Whose
Anyways,
bones are in the statues of the heralds?
there's some. I mean, they've died several times. Just do they keep their body after death?
I don't know if we know.
I'm unclear.
I don't know if they
Unclear.
reclaim the same body each time or not.
Yeah, could be. Zyle could have been in there and just sticking bones in. Like you never know when I'm gonna need this, so it'd be handy to have. So
I mean, Zyle's got to have some sort of backup for in case something happens,
Yeah,
right?
like-
He's got to have some sort of plan cooking.
it's just some insurance, to fall back on in case everything goes crazy. Anyways,
I had another observation about this world. I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but it's starting to become a for sure theme now. Sanderson really loves to tailor his expletives, doesn't he?
Yes.
On Roshar, it's storms. Everything is storming, man.
Bridgman,
What is
yeah.
he doing? And then even on Nalthis, and our characters who apparently are from Nalthis, they have swear words relating to colors, or they'll just say, "Oh, colors." And then here we get to this world, and on this world, the expletives are clearly like nights and days. I caught it a couple times. There would be like, "Oh, days," or nights of fire, or something like that. But that was kind of confusing to me because we know where storms comes from, because storms is very pivotal to how Roshar works. And we know that colors are instrumental to the magic system on Nalthis. So now we get to this world on Cell, and now I'm confused because the swear words are nights and days. But what does that have anything to do with this world that we're on? That doesn't seem to match anything that was in the system description that we got for Cell. So I was a little lost by that, although that was clearly the swear words, but I wasn't quite sure how they matched.
I'll expound upon that here in a second, but Paul, I don't remember, what are the swear words in Mistborn?
well, first I have a guess as to days and nights. Well, so a lot of this seems tied in like the history of things. So I'm wondering if nights and days is just kind of an allusion to like time, like days spent. As time goes on, histories get more expansive, and therefore it's probably more difficult to do stuff. That's probably going. That's harder to pick up, so I don't know for sure, but that's my guess. Swear words in Mistborn. I don't know that I remember. Is it like with the mist? Like,
it is. It does have to do with
mist?
mist,
Like
but I don't remember exactly what it is. It's been too long since I've read it.
I have
Go ahead.
I have just recently, like, just cracked the cover. I'm like 5 or 6 chapters into the Hero of Ages now. So I have not finished our first era, but I'm in the last book now. So
Gotcha. The Cytoverse, as it's called, it's not in the Cosmere, but the Skyward, Starsight, and Cytonic, his young adult sci-fi, their swear word of choice is Scud. The scudding aliens and the scudding satellites and all that fun stuff. So he certainly does tailor his expletives. I think it's just fun for him to throw in
Yeah.
random expletives that don't mean
I'm a
anything.
I think it's funny. I think it's tasteful, and it also just works for all of them. Like you can just come up with something, and then it's unique. So
Anything else for this abbreviated episode of Following Noadon?
I think we covered all my thoughts for the first half here.
Well, I had one thought of Elliot's that I see on our outline, and I didn't hear, and I'm actually curious to see why he brought it up. Ralcolest, a type of metal with anti-magic powers. Have we seen this before? Those are Elliot's words according to the outline, and I am curious, as a almost completed-ish first era Mistborn reader.
Anytime you see metal, it's just like ping.
Yeah, I'm like metal. There's a metal in here. Wow, that's got to be important, right?
I am so glad you brought that up, Paul. I cannot believe I missed that. That was probably the most important thing out of the first half of this, and I can't believe I just missed that. I skipped over that in our outline. Yes. So in one of the very early chapters, when they're talking about like how Shai was gonna escape from the cell that they had her locked in, she talks about this special metal that she calls Ralcolest. And she kind of from the context, we can work out that it's implied that Ralcolest is like resistant to the forgery magic. She kind of, explained like, well, you could have encased the cell in Ralcolest, and then I couldn't have forged it. And then like keeps on talking, but Ralcolest is brittle or something like that, and I could have broken it. And I paused there because we've seen metal with kind of anti-magic powers before on Roshar. More than once, I believe. There was a metal that Azure had in Kolinar. We mentioned this briefly a couple of episodes ago, I think, as one of our unanswered questions of where did this metal come from and what is it? Why does it have powers to protect and block detection and things like that? I think was kind of how it's been used in Roshar. Well, here's a metal now on this world that appears to have anti-magic powers. Could they be the same? I'm wondering now.
I don't actually know what did Ralcolest have a color? Did it describe Ralcolest having a color? I don't remember.
Understanding. I would guess that they are the same. I don't know if I should describe my thought process or not.
I'd save it.
Okay. I think that's a good choice. Wow, I get to save information I know.
Yeah, how's that feel?
This is new. I don't like it. I want to I want to talk about it. I want to be like, "Oh, looky here," But
now I've got Paul and Trevor withholding spoilers from me. Great.
Yeah, there we go.
So yeah, that was my notice. That was my perhaps those two metals are the same.
There's one more thing, and then I'll close the episode. That another metal that is resistant to magic, but not really. Like it's kind of just been developed as the magic system is shard plate itself. You can't lash someone in shard plate, even if it's, like no matter how much investiture you have, no matter how much stormlight or void light you have, you can't lash someone with shard plate. So that there's something there as well.
You're right. Or I have shard plate kind of in a different category in my head, in that it seems like we're learning that most shard plate is essentially a super awesome fabrial. It's powered by gemstones and stormlight, and so that seems to me, we haven't learned enough yet maybe, but that seems to me almost like maybe an artificial version of this, where they've come up with a way to kind of mimic that capability in the shard plate, whereas this metal appears to have this property naturally, where you just need a lump of it, and now it's gonna, block a shard blade or do whatever.
Anything else before we close the episode?
I think for real this time, that's all my thoughts.
I'm excited to read the rest of this.
All right, let's reconvene next week and talk about the rest of Emperor's Soul. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Eliot.
See ya.
Doodles.